Brendan, creators are struggling a little bit right now, right? Views are down, engagement is dwindling, followers are tough to come by. I mean, there's blood in the streets right now. Why are so many creators getting stuck in 200 view purgatory?
Well, there's a few reasons. First off, there's more creators. So I started in this space in 2005. You think back then, there's a few million people on social media.
Sure,
Today, there's close to 5 billion people.
that'll
So
do it.
every year, there's more and more people. So a lot of creators get very frustrated, and I understand their frustration as they put a lot of time, energy, and resource in creating content, and they don't get the visibility. And they try and blame the algorithms. The algorithms are out to get me, or I'm shadow banned, or they're suppressing my reach to get me to pay for ads and things of that nature. But the reality is it's purely competition. And when you think about why does certain content get 200 views versus certain content get 2 million views, and it can be about the exact same subject matter, it's all about retention, meaning the algorithms, their fundamental goal is a business one, is to keep people on these platforms longer so they can serve more ads.
Right.
So they're always going to favor content that can grab and hold attention longer than other content. Now, because the competition is, so much at this point with the billions and billions of pieces of content that are published each day, it comes down to minutia details. Like, and I'll just give you a story, an example. So I
Perfect.
have a friend who is very successful on social media. His name's Alex Stemp. He's a professional photographer. He's got over 20 million followers. He approaches random strangers on the street and offers them professional photo shoots. So at one point, we sat down and analyzed his most viewed video, which at the time was 100 million views, and we compared it to an average video for him, which was 5 million views. And in terms of the average time somebody spent watching the 100 million view video on TikTok, it was 27 seconds versus the 5 million one was 21 seconds. So we're talking about a 6 second differential in holding attention that represented 95 million views in performance. So that's really the kind of delineation factor is what I say, and our team says when we're working with people, it's not about the content. Usually people have great content. They have great things to say. They
Sure.
have great products and services. It's about the context about how you're delivering it. I don't know if you've ever been to a conference or even just thinking about in college, university, listening to a lecture where you have this genius person on stage or genius person in front of the classroom and you're falling asleep
For sure.
because it's not about the content, it's about the context and how they're delivering it. And that's the reality of social media is you have a few seconds to grab that attention, but it's not just about grabbing them, you have to hold it for as long as possible. And the longer you hold it, the more the algorithm's going to push it to more and more people.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty interesting. I'll be honest with you, I had no clue that the competition had really grown, that much in recent years. But it makes a lot of sense. I mean, everyone has a smartphone, and almost all of them are creating content in some way, type or form, whether that's posts on Twitter, X, or Instagram, or some other social platform. But it's tough out there for sure. I think like you said, it's all in the minutia. It's in the details, right? Like that is what is going to separate you from the pack. So what would you say if you had to kind of boil it down is like the secret sauce to a viral video? Is it just the amount of time that we put into the concept?
So we spent the better part of 6 years developing a creative model and invested several million dollars in building it out. And really, it's the starting point. Like it's where you start. And what you said is it, spending time on the ideation or coming up with ideas or the concept of it. The reality is if you start there, you're really doing a disservice to yourself.
Sure.
What you need to do is you need to start with understanding what's working in the social media landscape, what's working and what's not working. So, two of the biggest mistakes that I see people making with social media is number one is they're just looking at their own content, and like let's just say that you're stuck at 200 views of video or 1,000 views of video, whatever you're at. If you just keep analyzing your own content, like how do you imagine that you're going to get better? It's kind of like when you think about learning a musical instrument, like sitting down to learn the piano,
Right.
is when you sit down to learn the piano, you don't just start creating your own songs each time you go to sit down to play the piano and expect to get better at piano. No, you look at like Mozart, or you look at, music sheets. You buy music sheets, you study those, you learn from that. So that's one of the big mistakes is people are just looking at their own content instead of really studying the larger ecosystem. Like, for example, I started in film school. I went to film school, and what do you do there is like you sit down and watch the best movies and you break them down. You read screenplays, you break them down, you understand the elements of storytelling. And the second big mistake is people just look at the metrics. They get so caught up in the numbers of views and shares and click throughs and impressions, but that only tells you if something works or doesn't work. It doesn't
Right.
reveal the why to it. So in our model, and the way that we look at it and the way that we recommend, the best place to start is before you even come up with an idea is look at the larger social ecosystem. So whatever platform you're focused on, let's just say you're focused on Instagram. You want to do
Sure.
Instagram Reels. Start studying the platform and identify a very specific format that you think is a vehicle to express your information. So to give you an example of a format, I mentioned my friend Alex Stemp, that's a professional photographer. So he uses man on the street format. You approach a random stranger on the street and you react. They react to your interaction. There's many different versions of it. Another one that you've probably seen is called Two Characters, One Light Bulb, where the same person plays an expert and the novice, and they have a conversation about a specific subject matter and debunk a common myth about something. So it's used for finance, for legal, for nutrition, any of those different elements. So we start with that format as a vehicle to deliver your message, and then we start studying it. We take 10 or 20 of the highest performers, and like Two Characters, One Light Bulb, it could be like 10 million views plus. Then we'll take 10 to 20 of like the average performers, which is like a million views. Then 10 to 20 of the underperformers, which is like below 100,000 views. And what we're studying is the contextual elements that show up that drive the performance up in the high performers that don't show up in the low performers. So what we're doing is we're studying what is the best format, what is the best, vehicle to deliver our message, and then dialing in, well, how do I need to actually master that specific format before I even come up with an idea?
Love
Because if you
that.
just jump to ideas, you're just going to be churning out content, and something doesn't work, you're not going to understand why it doesn't work, versus becoming a student and learning the different aspects of what drives performance and not drives performance in terms of the platform that you're on and the storytelling structure that you're going to be using.
That's pretty cool. I mean, I'd assume almost no one who's just getting started actually does that, right?
No.
They just chat GPT an idea, and then they think of a hook in like 30 seconds, and they hold their phone up and they record the video. Maybe they get it edited, they post it, it gets 300 views, and they're wondering why. I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Is kind of find the vehicle, the format that you think would work for your content, and maybe that's man on the street, maybe that's something else. I've seen a lot of videos these days where people are doing something with their hands that's not at all related to the message that they're delivering. Like they're like juggling while they're telling me how to get a stain out of my carpet. Like maybe that's what you decide is going to be your best vehicle, but whatever it is. And then go into those, analyze 20 high performers, mid performers, low performers, and try and master a format or two. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because most people are just chasing trends,
Right.
and trends are fleeting. Formats last. Like, again, I started in the film industry in the past, 50, 60 years. Every movie's used the same 3-act structure. It doesn't matter the genre, whether it's horror, sci-fi, comedy, they all use the same 3-act structure. And it's even thinking about a world-class storyteller like Steven Spielberg. He's not reinventing that structure each time he makes a movie. He's using that and becoming better and better and better at it, and understanding the nuances of how to leverage that as a storyteller. So it's, the blessing and the curse of social media is that anybody can pull out their phone, press record, and post something, which is a true blessing because it's truly democratized communication. Anybody can put their message out there, but it's a curse because it doesn't force people to think about it. Versus, um, if you want to go to be a stand-up comedian, and if you go up without prepping or studying jokes and go up in front of a crowd of thousands of people, you're going to bomb and you're going
Right.
to feel it.
Right.
Or if you are going to go and play the piano in front of 100 people and you've never played piano before, you're going to sound horrible and feel embarrassed. The reality is in social media, people rarely feel that because people just don't see the content.
Right.
That's kind of the pain. And then people don't understand, well, why am I not seeing that performance? Well, it's like any other art form out there. It is an art form. There is a science to it. There is a way to maximize the results and the communication and how to master the communication through these platforms.
Yeah, yeah, and I think like any other art form, your input is going to determine your output. And if you're only spending 30 seconds thinking of an idea, another 30 seconds brainstorming how to deliver it, and then 60 seconds recording it, it's probably not going to do that well. I think a lot of people kind of just feel like I'm such a charismatic personality with all this gravitas and magnetism, and all I need to do is just hold the camera up and speak to it, and I'm gonna break through the noise, and this video is going to go viral. And that might work in some cases, but I think in more than not cases, that is just not going to be enough in today's environment.
Yeah, and you will see a lot of people will go viral once,
Hmm.
but then they have no idea how or why they did it, and then they won't be able to reproduce it. Or they're using a trend, and that trend um, burns out and it no longer kind of works, and then they just don't know what to do next. So they have trouble kind of duplicating that level of success.
For sure. Now, you said there's a difference, I think, between format and trends. I think we kind of went over a couple of formats. Can you give me an idea of like what's a trend in comparison to a format that you think like wouldn't last?
So there's several trends. There's like just one that drives me nuts is like use it and it calls out a trend. Is like use this trending audio and you'll go viral.
Right.
And that's a format of like calling out a tactic and saying if you follow this tactic, you will go viral. So that is not really a format. It's not a storytelling mechanism.
Got it.
And you can just think about some of like the ice bucket challenge back in the day. Like that was a trend. Is like people don't do the ice bucket challenge today and really focus on it. But the other issue I would say as trend and kind of that example that I gave you is use this viral audio or use this filter and your content will go viral. The reality is if you look at 99% of people that do that, they don't go viral because that is not the reason that the video or the image or whatever it is went viral in the first place. It's all
Right.
these other contextual elements. Or you said, people juggling while talking or things like that. It's a tactic. It's not a storytelling format or
Right.
structure of how to actually communicate. And that's where people get into a lot of trouble is they'll see somebody juggling and they'll be like, oh, they're using their hands while they're talking. Or like there's another format that we break down called visual metaphors. So there's a clinical psychologist that's really successful with this, where she'll break down very deep and emotional content like trauma or PTSD as she's kind of working with a visual metaphor. So um, she'll put like a waste paper basket full of papers, and then she'll pull them out as she's explaining kind of anxiety, flatten the papers, and then put them back in to show how you can kind of work through kind of the difficulties and things of that nature. Now, people will look at that and they'll be like, oh, I just need to work with the visual metaphor. And they're expecting the same performance. But again, there's so many different variables that are happening at the same time to make that format successful that's the most important thing. It's kind of like going and seeing, you know, a horror movie that has a comedic character and be like, oh, I know why that movie worked. I'm going to go make a movie without ever studying filmmaking to begin with and expecting kind of you to create a masterpiece.
Sure. Sure. Makes a lot of sense. I used to work in film myself, by the way. Not on your end of it. I was a set electrician like 12 years ago. So I was one of those guys on set that was like standing near the lights and laying out the cable and whatnot. Very arduous, dirty work that I don't particularly miss.
Yeah, but you were you experienced it. Like you saw the people that you were working, especially like a director, or somebody in charge, a cinematographer or a lead gaffer.
For sure. For
That
sure.
is like they don't just walk on set without studying all these elements. It would just turn out like absolute garbage because people think just because I have a camera now you can literally film a movie with an iPhone, but just because you have the ability to do it doesn't mean it's actually going to turn out into something tangibly good.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And the same level of, preparation that they put into their work before they work on set, the cinematographer, the gaffer, the key grip, whoever it is, we have to kind of treat our content like that as well. And I want to just dive into like the research phase a little bit here too, because I feel like making content is, it's research, and then maybe it's preparing and scripting, and then it's shooting. And as far as like the research end, I understand it's important to like square off some time every week to kind of just like see what's working out there, see what formats are working and what vehicles you think your content could work with. Like the great creators that you've worked with, or maybe you even just have like a prescription for like, should this be something we're doing every day? Is it just like square off a couple hours a week to kind of research what else is working out there and look at other content besides ours? Like at a nuts and bolts tactical level, how much time should we be spending a week researching other people's content?
Well, the first thing that I would recommend is just start with one format
Hmm.
and really research and understand that format. Because if you look at the best creators and also, the clients we've had the most success with, it's taking a single format and mastering that format. This is not about choosing a new format each time you create a piece of content, or choosing a new format every week, or choosing a new format every month, because that's where mastery breaks down. Is if you're kind of changing the goalpost every time you're creating content, it's ultimately not. It's going to suffer and not really lead to the quality aspect of it. And it's again the friend that does the man on the street format with photography. Like he used that format to get over 20 million followers. People think that they need to constantly be reinventing the wheel with the content they're producing and being kind of original each time, but that's just not the case. So typically what we say is spend a lot of time in the beginning researching the specific format that you're going after, as you're doing the high performers, the average, and the low performers, and understanding the
Hmm.
differences. And then as you start producing content in that format, start benchmarking against the high performers of the research that you've done. So
Sure.
one of the exercises that we do with our clients is you put the high performer on one side of the screen, the client video on the other side of the screen, and you play it side by side. And there's just so much that you can learn as long as you're honest with yourself about like the difference between what they're doing versus what you're doing. And again, we're not talking about like taking the same content from the high performer and putting into your content. It's leveraging the context of that high performer against the low performer. So sometimes we will take somebody doing visual metaphors and use like an insurance agent that's using it successfully and apply it to an entrepreneur or a nutritionist or something like that. So we take the content out of it and we can still compare them and learn from it. But that's to me is like lay the groundwork for the research in the beginning, really understand that format at a deep level. And then
Sure.
once you have that foundation and you're starting to produce content, always benchmark it against the reference to kind of study and learn where things are falling apart if it's not breaking through and performing.
Sure. And so many creators are not doing that, right? They're chasing this
Yeah.
trend. Maybe they'll do a couple man on the street when they feel like it. They'll lean back into some talking heads. Maybe they'll throw some carousels out there, but it's just kind of like a mishmash of throwing stuff at the wall, and none of it sticks. What was the Bruce Lee quote, right? He doesn't fear the man that does 1,000 kicks one time. He fears the man that does one kick 1,000 times. And I think that really applies to to this strategy right here. Is find the format that speaks to you and master that format. I mean, you're going to grow your audience so much with much more velocity if you take that strategy. I like that a lot. So find that vehicle and really master that vehicle before you start adding other vehicles to your content. So that's kind of like covers like the research portion. Are creators spending a lot of time daily or weekly scripting their content, like preparing the content before they shoot? Is that something that you see in a lot of great creators?
It depends on the format.
Sure.
So there's certain formats, like especially YouTube long form, it's very scripted. So you will
Hmm.
see a lot of the top YouTubers using that. You look at like man on the street format, it's less scripted, but you do really need to kind of understand who are the subjects that you're picking and
Sure.
what is the kind of emotional response that you're trying to evoke from them. So we have some clients that's like it's the format and the structure, but there's very little scripting, but they kind of understand what makes the format tick, so they don't need necessarily a script. But then there's other formats that really need a script, so that you're hitting your notes specifically to make sure that there's no fall in retention. And we were talking with some other top YouTubers a few months back, and it was interesting because they would see that sometimes the scripted part would feel scripted, but it often performed better than the ones that were off the cuff. And you can, it obviously feels off the cuff. So sometimes, like especially in longer form content, those beats really need to be structured in.
Sure.
um, but other formats, it's not required. So, it depends on the format, but also depends on the personality as well.
100%.
Because some personalities can just kind of carry a specific format without a script structure.
Yeah, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you spoke in there a little bit, with the man on the street videos about how it's important that the type of person they're going for and the type of reaction they're trying to get, and that kind of just made me think about the target audience for our content. Like when we're making this content, is it very important that we have like a target avatar in our mind that we're directly speaking to when we're speaking to the camera?
So the way that we look at it, if you're trying to be at the top 1% of social media, and I'm
Hmm.
talking specifically organic, what we recommend in working with businesses is understand who your core audience is in terms of what drives the business. Like, what is that core avatar that drives the business? But at the same time, is we need to, what we call the generalist principle, we need to make that content digestible to the average person.
Okay.
Because if you're designing that piece of content for a very specific avatar, the minute the algorithm seeds it out to anybody beyond that, it's going to tank. And then the algorithm's going to be like, I'm not pushing this out to more people, because the algorithm doesn't know your intent, and it's not going to do the heavy lifting for you. They're designed, and all they want is content that they can see to millions and millions of people and hold attention for as long as possible. That doesn't mean that you're losing the fact of what your business goals and objectives are, because that's very important. Like, all the work that we do, is it's not about going viral for the sake of going viral. It's, how does this play to your overall business goals and objectives? How does it really drive your key KPIs of the business? So we look at understanding that core audience. So we're in the subtext of the content we're producing, we're speaking to them, but at a higher level, we're making it digestible and interesting to anybody. So
Can you
I'll
give me
give
an
you an
example of
example.
that? Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a client come to us that had a leather goods company. So he was selling like leather handbags, wallets, purses, things of that nature. And he really didn't have any social media experience. He had a few thousand followers on social media, and he was basically creating ads for his organic content, like
Hmm.
a beautifully shot video, demonstrating his kind of purse or wallet. First off, people don't log on to social media saying, I want to see a great ad.
Right.
And second of all, it's speaking to a very specific audience, because if I'm not interested in buying a purse, then why do I want to engage with that content? It's losing a big percentage of the audience. So we did the research. We helped him design a format called Is It Worth It? So in this format, he'll take like a $500 Chanel handbag, deconstruct it on screen, and tell you whether it's worth the money that you're paying for it.
Oh, that's cool. That's a cool
That
concept. I like
format
that a lot.
that format has generated several hundred million views, took him from a few thousand followers to over 2.5 million followers across his social media accounts. And with that is like, I'm never going to buy a Chanel handbag, but I'm interested to see, is it worth the money that, it's that you're paying for it.
Sure.
And it'll generate millions and millions of views. Now, a vast percentage of those views are not going to be people that are going to buy his product. But if you look at economies of scale, is like, let's say before, when he was producing those commercials, let's just be generous and say that 80% of those people watching those commercials were his core target audience, and it was generating 1,000 views of video. That's 800 potential customers versus, let's say, with the Is It Worth It format, it gets 10 million views and it's only 10%. So that's a million people. So we're going from 800 to a million people that have the potential to engage with his brand. And in his content, there's no calls to actions. All he has is a link in his bio. And because he uses this format, he builds so much trust, um, goodwill with the audience. People know, like, and trust him now because he's he's providing so much entertainment and value, and the numbers are so big that they just click on the link on his website, and he just sells out his products and his inventory.
Very
Like
cool.
previously, he was generating like 10,000 visitors a month to his website, and he was paying for each click through Google Ads.
Sure.
And then as this organic traffic picked up, it was 100,000 visitors a month. So it's just like, that's a prime example. Is obviously, as a business owner, he wants to sell his leather goods. But if he goes with the intent of saying, I'm going to create content to sell my leather goods, it's going to fall flat. Versus, I'm going to create content that builds that trust, that gets people to know, like, and trust me and my information and my brand, then they automatically want to take the next step. It's kind of, why does Nike and all these companies pay so much to professional athletes for endorsements, or celebrities or musicians? It's because we already know, like, and trust them.
For sure.
Like, they don't even need to, like, sell it. LeBron James doesn't need to say, go buy my new shoe. People see LeBron James wearing the shoe on the court, and they're just going to go and buy it. You know,
100%.
it's kind of that kind of mentality. And a lot of people get that wrong. They don't understand the purpose of, like, organic social and what it's meant to do.
Pretty interesting. But yeah, it's like, the Rock makes a tequila, and every professional wrestling fan in existence has just found their favorite tequila before they even tasted it. Yeah, it's that type of thing for sure. And so you mentioned in there that this particular creator that you work with doesn't use CTAs. I'm kind of curious, what is your overall view of the importance of inserting CTAs in your content? Should early creators not really be worrying so much about the call to action? Like, what should our general strategy be around CTAs within the content?
So, kind of our philosophy is get the content to perform first and
Mhm.
then layer in the CTA. Because if you're layering in the CTA from the beginning, you can't tell whether the CTA is driving down performance or it's the content.
Makes
If
sense.
you take that variable out completely and perfect the format, then you know that the CTA is not having any, downward performance, is not a downward performance driver. But if you get that performance dialed in, layer in the CTA, the performance drops, then you just know the way that you're layering in that CTA drops the performance. So, like, to give you an example, is like, we have a format that we work with, and we have tested, like, where do you place the CTA? But we've already kind of dialed in the format. So
Sure.
we just realized, if you layer the CTA and at the end of the video, it drives down performance. But if you layer in it like 3/4 of the way through, where you're just putting in the CTA subtly, but then there's more information for them to stick around, then the performance, holds, um, in terms of what the format is capable of doing.
Very cool. That makes a lot of sense, right? Like, let's make the content perform first, but before we start asking our audience to take some action. And I think that makes a lot of sense too, is kind of put it towards the back of the video, 3/4 of the way, and you've already offered some value. There's still some value to come. I'm just going to sneak this CTA in here, and then we're going to continue on with the show. I think that's an awesome format for CTAs. Once you built an audience, and just kind of like on the topic of building an audience, right? I think there's a lot of creators out there that are posted on Facebook, and they're posting on Instagram, they're posting on TikTok, they're posting on X, maybe they're dabbling some stuff on LinkedIn, and like none of it's growing. Like, do you think that creators for the most part should focus on one platform, maybe before they reach a certain number of followers? Let's call it 10,000.
Yes, I think that there's really something to say to focus on one platform, get it dialed in, because even like people look at Instagram Reels and TikTok and YouTube Shorts as the same thing. It's not. They're completely different. There's different user interfaces. There's different ways that people interact with content on those platforms. There's different mindsets. That's not to say that you can't post the content on other platforms, but focus on dialing in one. Like, it's hard enough as it is to master one format on one platform, let alone trying to do it on like 4 or 5 at the same time. It's just extremely difficult. It's like starting out and starting out wanting to play a musical instrument and you're learning the piano, the saxophone, the
Right.
violin, all of these things, the flute, all at the same time. It's just it's not kind of, I'm not saying that some savants can't do it.
Sure.
Um, but as you're starting, like just make it as easy on yourself as possible and knock out as many variables as possible.
For sure. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think I've certainly gone through that process myself where I'm trying to build a TikTok and an Instagram and a YouTube all at the same time. And it's just very tough to really, get off the ground, in multiple platforms at the same time. Cause like you said, there's little nuances to all of them, they're not the same by any, stretch. So, I kind of want to dig in a little bit more to just like the art of the hook, right? You are the master of the hook. Your company's called Hook Point. So I want to talk a little bit about the hook. And would you say that, the first 3 seconds when you're really hooking that attention, is it more about what people are hearing or is it more about what people are seeing on the screen?
So I don't know what the percentage is now, but a vast percentage of people consuming content, especially in short form platforms, is with the sound off. Um,
Interesting.
so even if the sound is on, and this is a big mistake that people are typically doing. So there's when we talk about social media, there's kind of like two delineations of how we look at it. There's like short form content, where on those short form platforms, you're basically scrolling through the feeds and like new content is coming up and it's playing, versus a lot of content on YouTube is you're watching something and then there's, depending if you're on desktop or mobile, there's thumbnails either on the right side or below that are like the thumbnail and headlines that are meant to kind of get you into the next video. So
Sure.
let's talk about kind of like short form in videos. Like one of the big mistakes that people make is they have no sense of the visual hierarchy of the content in those first 3 seconds. So for example, they'll have like maybe a meme card with like text on top. They'll have captions below. They'll have somebody talking and maybe they're walking and moving. You get on a subconscious level, you don't know what to pay attention to. And the minute your subconscious mind feels like it's getting left behind, you just move on to the next thing.
Right.
So any of those elements can be a hook. Like it can be an audio thing, but if it's purely an audio thing, you run the risk of the video being on mute. The most important thing is, what is the first thing in those first 3 seconds that you want people to pay attention to? Then what is the second? What is the third thing? Now, I would say starting out, you probably want to just focus on one thing to
Sure.
master, instead of kind of like it's more of an advanced tool to do, you know, 3 things on there. With long form, you've got your thumbnail and headline, so you've got the image and the headline. There's less variables that you're controlling, but just kind of a few of the things to kind of think about as you're designing effective hooks is, one thing that destroys the performance of a hook is if somebody feels like they know what you're going to say or they've heard it before, they're moving on.
Right.
Even if you have a different perspective, it just doesn't apply. Another thing that I talked about before is the generalist principle. The minute you're talking about something or conveying information that somebody doesn't care about, then it destroys performance. Like for
Right.
example, we did a breakdown of the two characters, one light bulb, and there was one guy that was talking about Roth IRAs, and there was one person just talking about like opening a traditional savings account. The Roth IRA one just completely tanked. It got like 70,000 views versus like the more generalist finance advice got like 2 million views. Why? Because you'd be surprised most people don't know what a Roth IRA is. If I don't know what it is or I don't really care,
Right.
then I'm kind of
We're
moving
going
on.
on to the next.
Like another example is there's a YouTuber, Graham Stephan,
Hmm.
that became famous for teaching finance to millennials, and his most viewed video is how I bought a Tesla for $78 a month. Like anybody would be interested to see it. It's such an effective hook. Versus if you were to say, I'm going to teach you the 5 car principles that I used to purchase a Tesla,
Right. Blah.
most
I'm,
people are kind of
I'm
moving
out of
on.
here.
So it's that generalist approach is critically important with a hook. Another example is there's a luxury real estate agent named Ryan Serhant,
Sure.
who
Of
now has a
course.
show on Netflix. But his performance, and he was on the $1 Million Listing before, but his performance on social media is driven by his mastery of social media and mastery of the general principle, where he would say, I'm going to take you on tour of a $250 million ranch. I'm going to take you on a tour of an $8 million closet. So what he knows is anybody would be interested in that. So it's an effective hook, but at the same time, subtextually, he's playing to his core audience of
Right.
ultra wealthy and luxurious, and it can be less than 1%, and it still has a meaningful impact. So those are kind of things to really consider as that general principle in terms of the hook, making sure that you're saying something that is uniquely distinct and different that that people people haven't heard before, or they may have heard the subject talked about, but the expression of how that hook is showing up is it's a different take on it. Like in a good kind of exercise, I consume a lot of sports commentary.
Okay.
Like you see this a lot in sports, is like everybody can comment about the latest, NFL game. Like we just had Chiefs Ravens game.
Sure.
Like
Last night.
everybody's gonna be talking about the game, but what is your hook that makes it like a different perspective, a different take on it? And that's typically what makes the most famous or successful broadcasters different from the people that are kind of the local people that don't kind of reach that higher level.
For sure. But what separates, the Stephen A. Smith from the local anchor at the
Yeah.
NBC station? Yeah, for sure. Hell of a game last night, by the way. I don't know if you watched it. It was
Yeah.
kind of a heartbreaking ending there for the Ravens. I don't know if I agree with the call, but heart goes out to all those Baltimore fans. But no, I definitely hear you there, and I think a lot of us get stuck in just the boring hook category, right? Like a real estate agent, here are 3 ways to pay down your house quicker. Like that's just not an original hook. It's probably something they've heard a million times. And it's most people are just going to scroll past that, even if it really pertains to them. Even if it's someone who's looking to buy a house, they probably heard that a million different ways, and they're going to keep going on their way. So I think that those are really good tips as pertains to the hook. And I'm just kind of curious, do you think like the mindset of a great creator, like is it important for us once in a while to like just remind ourselves that we are creating content out of service, right? Like we're here with this piece of content to make someone's life better, to brighten their day, to make their life easier. Like just kind of internally, do you think from a mindset perspective it's important to remind ourselves that it's not all about the views, like we're actually doing this to help other people?
Well, I think that people perceive the world in different ways. People perceive their motives and actions in different ways. People perceive social media in different ways. I think there's definitely something to be said for what you laid out. I would kind of make it a little bit broader and saying understanding why you're actually making the content, what is actually driving your decisions to do that. Because if you're not, because you could take that mindset as I am there to be of service, but you ultimately don't get the performance and then you quit.
Sure.
So the real question is, were you really doing it for service, or were you doing it because you wanted to make a living out of it, or you wanted to do something else? Because I know some creators that provide tremendous service and impact on the world, but it is a business. Like in order for them to continue to have that service, they need to generate the views and the revenue and things of that nature. Otherwise, they couldn't allocate all of their time to producing that content. So I think it's really important to get clear on what your goals and objectives are, and also making sure that you have the foundation to pursue it. Like if you are going to pursue this as a hobby, that's one thing. If you're going to pursue this as a career and it needs to support you so that you don't have to go work another job, then you need to have that foundation in place. Because I've just seen more so people that want to do this full time and they still want to do it from a sense of service. If they don't have that foundational business built in, or that way to maximize eyeballs or the revenue off of it, then they ultimately kind of have to quit or burn out because they don't see those tangible results. So I think it's definitely critically important to understand why you're doing it and benchmarking yourself against that to keep you going, because creator burnout and fatigue is a real thing.
For sure, for sure. And you spoke a little bit there about, kind of, looking at it like a business as it is, especially for someone who's looking to do this full time. What are like the key 2 or 3 metrics that you think as creators we should be keeping track of on a weekly basis, making sure the trajectory is going in the right direction?
So it's interesting. I think it's less about the metrics. So let's take a step back. There's many different ways that you can monetize social media. And I've worked with creators that have millions of followers that make like six figures a year. I have worked with creators that have millions of followers that have turned that audience to multi-billion dollar empires. So the reality is you can take your audience and turn it into something as big as you can dream. But that, dream has to be there. Like you have to kind of have like what am I kind of ultimately doing? So to me, I like to start with clients of like what is the foundational piece of success for you through this medium? Like, are you really just trying to play the ad game, and like monetize through ads? Are you trying to monetize through sponsorships? Do you have a business that you're trying to generate leads through? Are you building a brand new company where that brand equity that you're building on social media is building the valuation of that? But looking at the foundational piece of like what's driving the decision to do social media, and it can be any of those things, and I'm not saying that there's a right decision and a wrong decision. In that, I will advise people just kind of, you know based upon where they're at and where they want to go, but I think that those foundational pieces should be the benchmark, because I know people that have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers that can make six or seven figures. So
Sure.
it's not always the correlation that the size of the audience matches kind of the income. So I would really benchmark it against like what is the foundational piece and put those kind of KPIs in place versus starting with kind of the views, the followers, the engagement, which you should still look at, but it's really what is the outcome of that that I would pay more attention to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And, I think that then kind of what I would ask myself is, what platform, should I be targeting right now? Like, do you think there's some platforms out there that are perhaps a little bit more of an opportunity than others? I feel like Instagram very tough right now to build an audience. Do you think maybe there's some more opportunity in a LinkedIn or a TikTok? And of course, it all depends on what audience you're trying to reach. But like, what one or two platforms do you think presents maybe the cheapest attention, the most opportunity to grow quickly right now?
So there's two answers that I start with, and then I can kind of give you some kind of more general advice. But the first one is what is the format that you want to do? Because typically the format and the performance of that format is tied to a platform. Now there's certain formats that can extend to different different platforms, and secondarily, like what is the platform that you use the most? Because like if you're going to become a student of the game, like how are you going to kind of then train yourself to go to that platform? And you can, but it's just like if you use that platform a lot and you start going into this mindset of learning as an active approach every time I go on the platform, just as using it as a passive kind of, um, you know, passing the time tool, you kind of get more of an understanding of what drives performance on those platforms. You're more tuned in to kind of how things work, the culture, the types of conversations and things of that nature. Now, if we look at it from a more generalist kind of standpoint, TikTok is a little bit easier to kind of gain some momentum and traction. The algorithm is much more friendly in terms of discoverability for new artists. Now,
Sure.
with that said, is Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts specifically know that TikTok is that way, so that they have tried to engineer their platforms where it is easier. Like Instagram is a lot easier than it once was in terms of discoverability and gaining audience and going viral. Same with YouTube Shorts. Like they're all competing against each other. Like so they want creators. The reality is every platform wants the creator to win
Sure.
because the more creators that win, the more creators will spend on that platform. Um, so it really kind of depends. Like, first off, you got to make the determination: do I want to do long form or short form? Because
Right.
if you want to do long form, it's YouTube. Like,
100%.
none of the other platforms have master long form, nor do I think that they will ever master long form. YouTube is in an interesting position with YouTube Shorts now, so you can do short form content alongside long form. Um, LinkedIn is a little bit of a tougher. It's a less mature algorithm than most of the other kind of networks. It's definitely lower numbers, but it's a much more targeted audience, and there's
Sure.
other ways you can maximize it. Um, TikTok obviously has the looming. Is it going to be banned? Is it not going to be banned? If it were to be banned, it's going to be several years before that even kind of comes into conversation. But if you kind of want the easiest and quickest win, probably TikTok is going to be easy. Although Instagram Reels does have success,
Sure.
um, and YouTube Shorts is interesting because, like YouTube Shorts, if you just started with short form content, you can build an audience, and then if you ever wanted to migrate to long form, like you have a built-in kind of audience that can kind of consume that content.
Yeah, I remember when Reels first came on, it was crazy the amount of reach you could get with your videos. I mean, I had them popping off 20,000, 60,000, 1.9 million. It was unbelievable. It's like everything you threw out there was getting a massive audience. And of course, it's certainly become more difficult as the competition has grown. Curious kind of what your thoughts are on AI. Should creators be leveraging AI in any way, or is it not really a necessity as things stand right now?
It's not a necessity, but well, I mean, we're experimenting and exploring with AI because it's a core pillar of the future of our business. A majority of kind of what we invest in is our qualitative analysis. We have like the largest library in the world of data on why content goes viral. So we're prepping for the day when you can literally not have to step in front of the camera and use prompts to create content. The reality of the situation is with AI is a lot of people see AI as the solution when AI is just a tool. It's a tool as how good is your data set? How good are your prompts that you're putting into it? And how good is your ability to analyze the output? Because to give you an analogy, is like if everybody woke up tomorrow, every single piece of content tomorrow that's posted at any social media platform was using AI, not every piece of content is going to win. You're going to be in the same
Right.
bucket. There's going to be winners and there's going to be losers.
Good point.
So, like right now, we build script templates for our clients based upon our qualitative analysis of specific formats, and that's a great tool that ChatGPT can help. You can build a model off of it specific to your content, your script template, and things of that nature. It's not there with the visuals. We're constantly testing, but from my perspective, I think that it's good to kind of experiment and to understand where these things are going. It's moving extremely quick. I'm not going to sit here and say that it is crucial. It's your key to success with social media because it's not. It's a tool, but it's definitely there's benefits to working it into your creative flow and the creative process that you use. But if your creative process and flow is flawed, then it's only going to be amplified by the AI itself. Like it's not
Sure.
going to fix any glaring problem with your performance today.
Right. AI is a tool. It is not the
Yeah.
savior. I think that's a good way to go about it there. And let's talk about bio for a moment. Someone sees my video, they like it, they visit my page, they're checking it out, they're considering hitting that follow button. What can we do to optimize that bio to make sure that once they visit our page, they actually do follow us?
Well, I think this is kind of where we talked about in the beginning the format and having
Mhm.
consistency with the format, A, from a performance standpoint, but also if you're jumping from trend to trend to trend and that trend is not associated to kind of what you represent, what your business is about,
Sure.
then there's gonna be a disconnect. So that's kind of a big thing is people often do make this creative decisions or content decisions for the sake of going viral, but then it doesn't connect to your sense of the bio or what the person represents, thus they won't go and follow it. But one having a very solid hook, like as we talked about, like why should somebody care to follow you? They've watched this content, they spent this time, but what are they going to get out of following your account? What is the value you're providing? But what is the differentiator between you and somebody else that may be talking about the same thing? So being very clear and concise with that hook and making sure that it's actually matching the content that is gaining that traction will ultimately lead to that success. But that again, like one of the exercises I give people for hooks, and you can go and do this yourself is just go to a magazine stand and imagine that you were given the cover of Time magazine or some other magazine and look at all the other magazines on there. You know, if you look at a Time magazine, there's not like a paragraph of content on there. There's a clear message of why you should buy this magazine because of this article or this person featured on it. And kind of think about your bio in the same context is they need to pick out your profile, click the follow button against thousands of other accounts that they're exposed to on a daily or weekly basis. Like, what makes you stand out? What makes you different?
Love that. I think that's a question that it seems like we kind of keep going back to. What is making me stand out? What's making this content stand out? What's making this hook different? We kind of constantly have to be analyzing, what differentiates us from the other thousands of pieces of content that person's going to consume this week. It's a really productive question to kind of ask internally. And, for someone who's really just trying to get started here, that they picked a vehicle that they think is going to work for their content, they're dedicated to mastering that vehicle. What cadence do you really suggest people post at? Is once a day like the bare minimum that we need to be putting out there to expect any type of growth, production, or improvement?
We're just huge proponents of quality versus quantity. I'd rather you put out a piece of content where you've methodically done the research, you've put together the piece of content based upon your understanding, and then be able to benchmark your decisions against it than just putting out a piece of content every day. Because, I mean, we just see that, it's, I guess the question is like, would you rather produce 100 pieces of content that each piece of content generates 1,000 views, or would you rather have one piece of content generate 10 million views? And if you're creating one piece of content that generates 10 million views, following the process that we talked about today, that means people actually bought into what you said. Like, you retained their attention. And if you follow that process, albeit it can be a slower process than just churning out content every day, you're actually mastering a skill set to be able to do it again. Versus producing 100 pieces of content, maybe one goes viral and you have no idea why that one went viral. So you have to create another 100 pieces of content. So to me, it's like, start slow, master the principles. Now, don't go, unless you're doing YouTube long form, I wouldn't spend 6 months on a single video in the beginning. You
Right.
need to eventually get it out there to understand. Now, there are some creators that will spend 3 to 6 months on a single video, and that's how they do their content. But they methodically understand their format and the
Sure.
performance. They know it's going to perform. But just starting out, like, you want to get those reps in. So if you're doing short form, I would just start like with one piece of content a week. If you can do two, but making sure that you're studying and learning with each piece of content. And then as you're understanding it, then you can kind of ramp up to the level that you want to do it. If it's long form, maybe once a month, once every 6 weeks. But the most important thing is, are you learning with each piece of content that you're producing? If you're not, then there's not a tremendous amount of benefit to kind of just churning out as much content as possible.
Quality over quantity. I think that's a good note to end on. Brendan, thank you so much for your time today, brother.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Where can everyone keep up with what you got going on right now?
If they want to learn more about our work, they can go to Hook Point. Also, if they want, I just released my third book, The Guide to Going Viral. So if they go to guidetogoingviral.com, they can get a free ebook version of the book.
There it is, guys. Brendan, thank you for being with us. Everyone out there, thank you for listening. This has been Persistence Playbook, and this is your weekly reminder that you will feel resistance to the work you know you should be doing this week. When you feel that resistance, lean into your why and take action anyway. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye, guys.